This race as leans Democratic, and recent polls show Congressman Walz with about a 7-point lead.
Welcome to the final debate in the race for Minnesota governor. It's part of TPT's election year In It Together initiative. The debate will take up the full hour and will consist of policy questions, questions about politics, and a series of yes or no lightning round type queries. We'll mix stuff up a little bit.
We will indeed. A quick word about the format. Almanac pioneered informal political debates more than 30 years ago. We did away with the lecterns and the stopwatches and opening and closing statements. Our goal is to have a conversation with the next governor of Minnesota.
We issued invitations to candidates in the race who have averaged 5% support in independent polling, and that leaves us with just two candidates. Tim Walz is the DFL nominee for governor, currently a member of the U.S. House. Jeff Johnson is the Republican candidate, now serves on the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners.
Now, this is the second debate of this campaign here in Almanac, and the candidates have swapped places on the couch from their first visit, just in case you are at home keeping score on this one. So welcome to both of you. Good to see you again. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
We should mention, of course, that that first debate, Tim Walz, you got the first question. So tonight, Jeff Johnson's going to get the first question, I think. So it's this. A key part of the job of being governor is to lead in a crisis. Say a natural disaster, tornado hits St. Peter, Minnesota, Comfrey, that's sort of an event, 35W bridge collapsing, I guess. So give us an example of when you led in a crisis and how did you do?
Oh, God, that's a great question. You are the first one to ask that question in this 1.5-year long campaign. I would say that I have led in a crisis in our church in the past. When I was president of our congregation, I go to what some would call a mega church, a very large church in Golden Valley, and we went through a period where we had some turmoil with respect to staff members. I was the president at the time, and it was a difficult time for a church, as it always is, because you like to assume that everyone who works for you is not human and doesn't make mistakes, but a couple did. And the role of a leader is to bring people together during those tough times, to remain calm and kind of try to sail through that, and we did it well.
Okay, so you think you passed that test?
I did.
All right. Congressman Walz, give us an example.
Yeah, well, the St. Peter tornado, National Guard service there, and Grand Forks flooding. I slept in the Crookston Armory for about 10 days as we were there on the day of the fire. But the one that I think, it's not always in those times of immediacy there, but what was happening, being in that classroom on 9/11 and the students, and many of them still write, and there was one just yesterday wrote about the sense of calming perspective of what's going to happen when you had students that were watching a world that seemed to be spinning out of control in front of them, to try and keep them in a place where they could stay focused, stay calm, and start to regroup. So I think leadership is always in crisis time is most about the perspective. It's about not stirring fear. It's not about ginning things up. It's about staying calm, looking at the facts, and then staying a plan to move forward.
All right.
National polling shows that the Republicans are mainly interested in the immigration issue, concerned about immigration. Democrats mainly concerned about health care. And I wonder, Commissioner Johnson, can you convince doubters why they don't need to worry about health care if you're in the governor's seat?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been very consistent throughout the campaign, despite some of the absolutely despicable commercials that have been on TV, especially lately. I believe you need to look at health care in two pieces. The first piece is, let's make sure in Minnesota that we continue to take care of people who need help, whether it is people who can't afford insurance or whether it is people with pre-existing conditions. And I've always believed that we should provide affordable, guaranteed coverage to those with pre-existing conditions.
How do you do that?
Well, I believe that a better system was how we did it before the ACA, which was our MCHA high-risk pool. It worked pretty well.
Well, that had a private insurance a board governed that. There was no elective person that...
right, but it guaranteed affordable coverage to those with pre-existing conditions. But it needed a big state subsidy
because the premiums, which were high, didn't even match what... the amount of money was needed.
Yeah, it needed a big state subsidy, much less than what we're subsidizing through our reinsurance program right now.
Okay.
But what it did was it allowed the individual market to be stable. And when the ACA came in and said you can't have that anymore, which many states are now saying, boy, I wish we had what Minnesota used to have, it totally blew up the individual market and people's insurance premiums went through the roof. That's the other half of the equation. And a lot of people ignore the other half. They say, all we're going to think about is this half because that's the one that makes people scared. Well, we also also have to look at how to bring down premiums for everybody who's paying for their insurance, either themselves or through an employer. And you do not do that by having a total government takeover, single-payer health care. You do it by forcing more competition into a system that is really missing competition right now.
We're going to ask you about that immigration part, but, you know, in terms of, are you for single-payer?
I think that's probably the path where we end up. And I say that because, be very clear about this, there were no protections for pre-existing conditions before the ACA. A vote for the ACA was the first time in this nation's history we had those protections. And making sure that people had that protection, making sure they were covered, and then making sure we were focusing on preventative care where people were finally getting that under the ACA, we started to see health outcomes improve. And that's the real key to driving down insurance premium prices. But let's be very clear, there's no market in healthcare, because markets by nature, there would be a failure, someone wouldn't have it. There's not going to be. You cannot simply shrink a pool to the sickest people and say that's where we're going to manage them when they're in crisis. That's not the way to go about this. The way to go about this is making sure everybody has that preventative care, making sure that everybody has that access on the front end. You start to drive down prices, and the ACA did that.
Of course there's no market in healthcare because government has moved in, and now you want to take that last step, although I'm not sure what your answer was. Are you for single-payer healthcare?
Yes, that was the answer I just gave you. But
you
the
said
issue
you think
on
we're
this
going to go there, but are you for it? Are you going to push to get us there?
Yes, I'm for not paying twice as much as any other industrialized nation, getting half for it. I'm making sure that the 14 top nations that get the best returns at the least cost end up making sure that you cut out that piece that is simply payer, getting between people and their doctors. And I think in Minnesota, this argument again, the plan, and everyone knows, there's no plan to protect people with pre-existing conditions unless you have the ACA in place.
Yeah, that's utterly ridiculous. We did it for 30 years in Minnesota before the ACA, and we did it better before. But let's be honest now about what single payer is. Single payer says that everybody loses their insurance. There is no private insurance, and we are forced onto one government plan. That's where Tim wants to go.
Medicare, where people are real happy.
Veterans, veterans health care.
Yeah, right.
VA
we're all
is
part
different.
of the VA.
VA is different.
And there is no state in America that is a single-payer system. None. Okay. California almost went there, but they backed out, said it was too extreme.
We can do better than that.
Let's go back. Let's go back.
Immigration, right? I mean, in terms of, so we asked about health care. So tell Republican and independent voters that you have a reasonable position on immigration.
Yeah, well, I certainly do, because I've done this before, and I said 24 years in national service on security, numerous trips to the border to actually witness how we do security in depth and how we do it electronically and with human surveillance. This issue right now, I think all of us know, every sovereign nation has the right and the need to control its borders, but the issue is of stoking fear and telling us that we're not stronger because of immigration. This is another case. It doesn't matter what your plans are. The next governor of Minnesota is going to have the capacity to bring people together to solve problems. Immigration is an issue that has always bound this country together, has always been positive. And what we see right now is fear, telling people that, you know, they're in danger, that these things are going to happen, rather than coming up with real solid plans like comprehensive immigration reform that passed the Senate was never heard in the House. The federal government's responsibility for immigration reform could be done right now. And this idea that you should go get in line and come through legally is exactly what people want to do. The problem is there is no line. So instead of fixing that, we stoke fear of our neighbors, stoke fear of immigrants, stoke fear that you have to be worried in Minnesota about a state that is founded on immigration. It just makes no sense.
I'm curious, with your background with the National Guard, if President Trump were to say, we want you to send National Guard troops to the border as these migrants are coming up, what would you do?
Well, you look at each individual mission. The one thing I can say is people need to be very clear. Sending 15,000 troops to the borders means we have more people going to the border on women and children fleeing oppression than we do fighting the Taliban and ISIS in Afghanistan and Syria. So I think you look at these individuals. The governor's job is to rise above the fear. I think this issue of continuing to bring up false narratives a week before an election, I think a governor's job is to stand up. When the president says he's going to take away birthright citizenship, the governor's job is to not say no comment.
How do your views on this issue differ from the congressman's?
They differ dramatically. And Tim, you say it doesn't matter what your plan is because you don't want people to know what your plan is. And you've been very, very open, at least in front of certain crowds, to say that you want Minnesota to be a sanctuary state for illegal immigrants. And you can gloss over that and say, well, it's fear-mongering to bring that up, but you use that to win a primary. And I don't think most Minnesotans want that. We would be the only, there are, 5, 6 sanctuary states in the country. We'd be the only one in the upper Midwest. And what that means is that we would prohibit our law enforcement officers from cooperating in any way with the federal government to enforce immigration laws. We would become the magnet for illegal immigrants throughout the country, especially because we have a very generous welfare system.
What's your definitive statement on?
Well, that's Jeff's definition of it. Of course, if someone commits a crime, they're going to prison. But once again, when I go to talk to folks, they're concerned about education, they're concerned about health care, and they're concerned about finding a governor who can unite us around one Minnesota. So people are smart. They know what's happening here.
What have you said to other people about being a sanctuary state?
I said that the federal government is responsible for federal immigration policy, and state and local police job is to gain the trust and making sure that people feel that they're able to go to the police. So if you have someone who's in human trafficking, domestic violence, or they see a crime being committed against one of your family members, people who are simply waiting to be adjudicated in their status, DACA, whatever it might be, are afraid to go to the police. So what happens is, in places where they do that and they make fear in these communities, crime goes up. Statistically true.
Jim, you never answer questions. And here's another example. This is a simple yes or no question. Do you think we should be a sanctuary state? You've said yes before, but now we're in front of a different audience and you won't answer the question.
Jeff, simple statements for fear-mongering. You've got the opportunity now.
Okay.
We know where people are at on this.
Can we talk about fear-mongering?
And the situation,
I would love to talk about fear-mongering.
The situation is right now that this is a very clear statement on how you do this. We've done it before, and you're telling people...
It's a yes or no question.
It is not a yes or no question.
Yes, it is. Are you for being a sanctuary state or not?
I'm for securing our communities and holding true to who we are.
Well, let's try another topic.
No, in terms of the fear-mongering.
I want to talk about fear-mongering for a minute. And my question for you is, I don't know if you've seen the latest ABM ad. I'm sure you have Alliance for Better Minnesota. These are the folks who are essentially funding your campaign. They've spent close to $5 million on attack ads that have been false, as KSTP found them to be false, about pre-existing conditions. But the last one is, I would argue, a new low in the history of political ads. They are using a disabled young man to say that Jeff Johnson will not provide any health care coverage to poor, disabled children. I think that is despicable. It's obviously false. But they don't seem to care about that. Is that fear-mongering? Are you okay with that commercial?
I've not seen the ad, but the fact is...
You can't tell me. Everybody's seen it because it's on every 10 minutes.
Here's my pro tip, Jeff. I don't watch TV during these last few weeks. I've been through these before.
There's no way you haven't seen the ad.
Candidates cannot...
I don't appreciate that when I've not seen the ad, Jeff.
Well, you know about the ad because we've been talking about it for several days.
Candidates,
I don't follow what you're talking. I'm talking about what Minnesotans do.
Candidates can't cooperate with these outside groups. Is that still the law?
Absolutely.
All right.
However,
the fact is pre-existing conditions will disappear. And that's every group that's out there says so.
I think this is vile. And if we want to move to this place in Minnesota, where you're not just lying about an opponent, but trying to destroy them personally, that's too bad.
We'll have a chance to talk about commercials later in the hour. But here's another health issue. The advocates for the mentally ill are talking about a $100 million package to the 2019 legislature that would dramatically increase the number of mental health pros in schools. They want to make sure that private insurers give parity to coverage of mental health as well as physical health, incentives to get more students into the psychological business. Is that something you could get behind at that level of spending? Or?
Well, I don't know about the level of spending because I think you have to look at a whole budget. I think we have to be responsible rather than just promising everything to everybody, which I will never do. But I would absolutely be open to it because one of my biggest complaints about Minnesota government is that we spend a ton of money. We've seen massive spending increases and tax increases in the last 8 years, and we still don't do a great job of taking care of our most vulnerable citizens. I look at what we pay group home workers. I think it's pathetic. And we say we don't have enough money. Yes, we do. It's just we throw it at everything. People who are mentally ill... You want to raise their minimum
wage, the healthcare workers? You want to raise their minimum wage?
No, I want to change the formula so that they make more based upon what the government reimburses.
So you'd be open to this mental health initiative?
Absolutely, because I think some of our most vulnerable people are especially mentally ill children.
Yeah, first of all, you got to get everybody covered with insurance if you're going to do this. Secondly, Minnesota has led on this. Between Senator Wellstone and Jim Ramstad on mental health parity. We're finally getting there. This is an issue that was my focus in Congress on veterans' mental health, and we know when we get on the front end of things, just like so many of these programs, if we do this smartly in the investments we make, we end up saving money in the long run, not just saving lives. And so the issues in schools, we know if we can get in early on some of these trauma in the first few days of when they happen, and we have counselors in sight, we end up seeing really good outcomes from them. So this conversation about the role of government and what we should should be doing is being much smarter, because on these issues of mental health care, if they're not taken care of, you will spend both on social services, criminal justice on the back end. So these advocates who are out there, there's best practices. We saw it with the Clay Hunt Suicide Prevention Act. We saw real results in that. We were starting to bend the cost curve, and that was working in community partnership, peer-to-peer type things. It works. It works.
We are going to break things up a little bit right now. Okay, we're going to do our lightning round.
Great.
Series of quick, yes or no answers, that kind of thing. So word of warning, we're going to be ruthless in cutting you off. So, Jeff Johnson, would you sign a bill that, if it gets to your desk, if you're governor, that would allow the sale of wine in grocery stores?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. How about is your attitude toward greater legalization of fireworks?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
Would you sign a bill that would require a hands-free cell phone bill?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Probably not.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because I think that you give people some level of freedom in their lives, and I'd be open to talk about it, but you're in a situation now where you are discriminating against certain people who don't have the money for something like that.
I just broke my rule in terms of being pithy.
Yeah,
I just wanted
I would add on this one too, though. The research behind this actually shows hands-free does reduce it some, but still is a distraction in and of itself.
All right, Eric.
Okay. Well, how about polymet? DNR's come through with a permit, but there's still Army Corps and PCA, I think, still has to do it. Your stance on the polymet permitting?
Follow the science, do the environmental reviews, do the permitting, make sure the liability fund's in place, and then mine and move us towards a clean energy economy.
Is there daylight between you two on this issue?
I don't think.
I actually think there is, because I never know what your answer is on this again, Tim, which is kind of par for the course.
Should I repeat that? What I just said there?
But your answer, I'll tell you what I think about polymet. I think we should be actually moving forward with it. They've been working on this for almost 14 years now. And I have a funny feeling that if the MPCA doesn't change, they'll be working on it for 14 more years before they get anything from them. I will change the MPCA. I think we should actually be moving through these processes so that we can allow the private sector to create good jobs. The process that we have in place, both at the federal and the state level, happens to be very strict, and I think that's good. But we've been throwing politics into this to slow it down.
We've totally abandoned the lightning round concept. But do you want to get a last word in on this?
No, we're not. Again, we're not going to shortchange the process. And I was very clear about this from the beginning. You follow the science. You follow the environmental reviews. You don't shortchange those. The permitting process, and then the liability that needs to be in place, and then you go forward. And then the piece that needs to be talked about in many of these things, making sure that we're collaborating with local folks, which we've been doing, and we mind.
We're kind of on an environmental bent right now, so I'm curious about this. On the state level, Minnesota has 2 goals on 2 different things: reducing greenhouse gas emissions and then increasing renewable energy. We're doing pretty good on the renewable energy, but we have not been meeting the emissions goals. The next governor and the legislature are going to have to decide what role state government should play going forward on this. So do you need to increase our renewable energy standard? Do you give support to new technologies like battery storage, electric vehicles, or do you let the free market decide what to do with this? I'll begin with
all three will do this, because the free market's moving that direction. They know that XL Energy, of course, is in carbon reduction better than any place else in the country. We need to set those targets. We need to make sure that the research and that the support is getting there. But the fact is, and I'm glad you asked this, because we've had these 8 debates and only the question on climate change, and this is a lot of daylight between us here. Jeff simply says it's not worth trying to attack it and don't put the time into it. I believe it's absolutely existential threat. At the state fair, the question was, should we do anything? You said it's not worth it because we can't make a difference. When we pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, this is where Minnesota can lead. This is where the states have an opportunity, and we already are with our biofuels, wind.
Commissioner?
Well, there is some difference between us here. I do believe climate change is real because the science shows it. I do believe that humans play a role in that. There is some question about how big a role. But there isn't a lot of debate about at least the plans that have been out there that I have seen about whether it would actually change things if one state essentially reordered its economy and cost people a lot of money. And if you can prove to me that it's actually going to make a difference, because I'm a measurement guy, I'm a science guy, and I'm a measurement guy. And if I'm very open to having these discussions, and if someone can show me, look, this is the difference it's going to make, I'm probably on board. But if we're doing it because it makes us feel good, and this is what I hear all the time, it's the right thing to do, okay, and what difference will it make? Well, it may not make any difference, but it's the right thing to do. If we're going to cost people a lot of money, which we will, this will send electricity rates skyrocketing even higher than they are, I want to know that it's actually going to matter. So common sense is what I'm looking for.
That's false. We're reaching parity on solar parity on other, we'll have baseload power. The green energy economy is going to be a job creator. We've seen it in states that have embraced it and moved forward. So to hold us back and to be dependent on whether it's natural gas or worse, coal makes no sense.
You don't see any jobs?
Hold on. Nobody said that I was going to hold us back, but I agree with you actually on part of this, which is I think the private sector, the market, is actually pushing us forward because most of us want renewables. Actually, I think that's a positive thing, and I think we'll keep moving forward with that. The question is whether you have state mandates that reorder the economy and cost people a lot of money, and I want to have some common sense and see that it actually matters.
Viewer Jim from Orr says he wonders if by mandating universal background checks on guns would create a gun registration, which he has concerns about.
No, I don't believe it would, and I think his concern might be warranted. But on this issue of striking the balance once again, of bringing responsible gun owners into this, of making sure we protect your Second Amendment rights, but also doing things that keep firearms out of the hands. We see in states that do this, they have a reduction in these shootings. States that have red flag laws, domestic violence, they start to see a reduction. And that's where you build coalitions, bring responsible gun owners, folks who care about this, come together to improve safety, but also make sure that Jim can go hunting deer tomorrow like he wants to.
I think it could lead to a gun registry, but the bigger issue for me is I think when we talk about whether it is universal background checks or bump stocks or the size of how much ammo you can put into a gun, we are ignoring, it allows us to ignore what the real issues are here. And we got some serious cultural issues because these things weren't happening 30 years ago. There were more guns, there were fewer gun restrictions, and these horrible mass shootings weren't happening. And you know, we have to talk about family breakdown because that plays a role in here. We've got to talk more about mental health because that plays a role in this. We've got to talk about the role of mass media because we're just drenched in violence and our kids see it. We got to talk about some of the policies that our schools have that actually ignore violent behavior for politically correct reasons.
Disciplinary things you're talking about?
Absolutely, and we get to ignore
What's
those
an example of that? Because I've been in schools my whole life.
Sure. The Minnesota Department of Education is essentially threatening to, or not threatening to, I think they actually have, sue schools if there is a disparity in discipline between different races. It doesn't matter what the facts are. You just have to have equal numbers. That is equality of outcome, as opposed to...
There is massive disparity, though.
There might be, but there might also be reason for it in some cases. And so now schools back off.
And that's creating violence?
Absolutely. If you are ignoring disruptive or violent behavior from some students because you're scared of getting sued by your own government, absolutely it is. You can look at the Parkland shooting. This kid, you have school officials who themselves said we ignored his behavior, and part of it was they were afraid of getting sued.
So Parkland's everything but guns?
No, Parkland's not everything but guns. I never said any such thing. But
so it is. The gun piece of it does come into the discussion.
I think we have to look at guns, obviously.
No, we agree there.
But you don't look at anything else.
Of course I do.
Well, you didn't before when you took the NRA endorsement, but now that you're proud of having your F, now it's all about guns.
Of course.
I think you have to be somewhat consistent on this because it's an important issue.
A rigidness in light of facts changing is not leadership. It's not moving forward. So
between 2 years ago and
the cheap
today.
nature of the weapons being on the market, the lowering of the age of where they got it. They've been evolving. We haven't been able to do background checks.
2 years ago, you got an A from the NRA,
and
voting
you were proud on background checks,
and then
voting for CDC research, voting for 4 years, voting on all of these things.
You changed from an A to an F proudly to win a primary, but no facts changed, Tim.
Yeah,
the audience changed.
So they changed with you.
Let's go on
I'm curious about minimum wage.
Yep.
Do you want to go ahead and explore that? We actually have another viewer question who wants to know. I'd like to know, this is Gene, by the way, Gene Peterson. Thank you, Gene. I want to know, if it's Governor Walz, would you increase the minimum wage to $15 statewide?
Yes. I think we need to make sure we get to a living wage for folks. That probably is at the minimum. I think Minnesota's moving in that direction. The good news is that in this economy, we're starting to see folks that understand to try and get people that are attracting minimum wages are going up. And we'll get there, and that's better for the economy.
No, I wouldn't have government mandated. I agree that we will get there because the market is pushing us there, and it should be because there's a great demand for workers. But I believe that a $15 minimum wage mandated by government, when we're several dollars lower than that, it's not just going to hurt small businesses, which people talk about all the time. It's going to hurt the people who we claim to want to help. We saw it in Seattle. The people who actually lost jobs were the least employable people. So and I'm glad to know where you stand on this, Tim, because last week you flip-flopped on this one.
Jeff, okay, we'll go on.
Well, did you flip-flop
No,
on this?
of course not.
Yeah,
I've been clear on the issue. The issue came up, Jeff. about in some places a housing wage is different than that, because the housing wage in Minneapolis makes 15 because you're trying to get stability in that.
Well, let's get to housing, because the governor's housing task force said, I think you need $17 an hour in Minnesota to get a modest 2-bedroom apartment to pay for that. And many, many people are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. Now, some of the advocates are talking about a dedicated funding source. I don't know if it'd be a sales tax in the metro or whatever to bolster our spending on affordable housing, which is a problem in the metro and in greater Minnesota. What are your thoughts on a dedicated revenue source or some other ideas on affordable housing?
Yeah, well, I don't know if we need a dedicated revenue source. This, along with several other problems, I'm happy to listen to advocates because I like new ideas. I like to try different things. I don't believe government should be owning a lot of housing. I think we do have programs in place, which I support, that provide incentives for the private sector to provide both affordable housing and workforce housing. I would actually argue that some of our requirements for affordable housing, we don't require that they stay affordable long enough, and I would actually seek to extend that. But, you know, this is one of many difficult areas in a budget, and it's easy to promise everything to everyone, but somebody's got to pay for it.
This is going to be the coalition building piece of this, and in this campaign I've got dozens and dozens of mayors who come on board. These community prosperity plan that we put out, the idea of making sure with local government aid for them to start addressing these in communities where they have the capacity to work, both public and private nonprofits, to attack this issue. Because, for example, in Worthington, the rent's too low to warrant building new housing, and so we're end up shipping in and busing a lot of people in from Sioux Falls. The issue, of course, in Rochester now is because property's gone up, you find a lot of those workforce.
Well, what to do about it?
Yeah, I think some of the things multifaceted, and I don't think Jeff and I are too far off on this. One of the things North Dakota does is they give a tax credit to businesses, especially when you have community towns that come back $25 million. You got like Austin with Hormel or Mayo Clinic, for some of them to help in partnership with this. And then I think there's ways that we can streamline the process and some of the permitting processes and some of the things that are adding costs when we're trying to build some of these, and then rehabbing existing, because new units are incredibly expensive as compared to some of the rehab we're able to do.
You know, you guys wanted to talk about ads. You want to do that now? Let's do that, shall we? We're going to roll an ad, and this one is from the Jeff Johnson campaign. This was on your campaign Facebook page, your website. Go ahead.
We've seen massive tax hikes in Minnesota, but our roads are still a mess, our schools still say they're broke, and we pay our nursing home workers less than McDonald's. We pamper freeway protesters, ignore welfare fraud, and government can't even issue license tabs. Minnesota is better than this. If you want more of the same, vote for the other guy. I will hold government accountable to taxpayers again and stop wasting your money. I'm Jeff Johnson. I'm going to give you your government back.
Okay, defend that ad.
Defend it?
Yeah.
I think it actually sets forth the reason I'm running for governor, which is that government isn't accountable in Minnesota anymore. We have a long history of good government, whatever that means to people in Minnesota. We don't have that anymore right now. We've got MNLARS, we've got MNsure, we've got elder abuse, we have child care fraud, we have the loss of 22,000 identity documents that government wouldn't have even told people about if the news hadn't discovered it. And nobody seems to be doing anything about it. Nothing seems to change. And I think I know people are really frustrated by that. And then the first half of the commercial, I talk about the fact that we've seen huge spending increases and huge tax increases. We are now the highest tax state in America, according to Kiplinger's last week. And we do have, most of our schools are saying we don't have enough money. We have road problems galore, and we don't pay our nursing home workers or our group home workers any more than McDonald's. Where's all that money going? There's no accountability in government anymore.
Congressman Walz.
Just the difference here is that there's no plan to fix any of that. Pointing out problems is pointing out and saying this is a problem, and no capacity and no history of ever being a coalition builder to move either, whether it's legislation at a federal level or building coalitions to get things done. Being a dissenting voice on a county board doesn't get those things done. And so I said that no accountability. For example, of course, we have to make sure if there's data loss. But keep in mind, the private sector has 4.5 billion data losses in the last year that went out. And the only reason we know about those is because they don't have to report it, and we have to do the same thing. So this idea that government is totally the problem, of course we should get efficiencies. Of course we should do things to bring that about. And those are the things why I was in Congress we're able to do to bring efficiencies in electronic health records. So it's the capacity to get it done. So pointing out a problem, that's fine. If you don't have the skill set or the capacity to be a uniter, to be someone who can bring folks together, it won't happen.
Commissioner.
So this whole campaign for me has been talking about what we need to do different. Actually setting forth policy proposals that not everybody loves, but actually being honest and truthful and upfront and substantive, as opposed to just saying we just have to bring people together with no real substance to it at all. So to suggest that there's no answer, do you want me to start? Because it would take the next half hour. I can give you lots of answers about what we need to do.
Well, we have a Tim Walz ad approved by the candidate. From is it Facebook? I think this is from. Well, let's roll it, and you can tell us.
My philosophy has always been that the economy is a garden. You have to take care of it. It needs tending. It needs nurturing. My Republican colleagues believe the economy is a jungle. Just let it go, and whatever happens, happens. I disagree with that. This idea that you're somehow thrifty by not investing in education, by not investing in infrastructure, by not investing in healthcare and research, it makes no sense when we could have a better educated, healthier workforce that lives longer and contributes more to the economy. That's what a forward-leaning economy looks like, and that's exactly what we plan to do as One Minnesota.
This is what separates us from other states. If we're going to race to the bottom, Mississippi, Kansas, whatever it might be, that's the attitude. Government can't do anything, it can't put anything in the right place. What I'm saying is if we have that healthy workforce that has access to affordable, quality health care, if we have a well-educated population that lifts up its teachers, that has the best folks in there, we're using best practices and creativity, and we're investing in an infrastructure that moves people, goods, ideas in a safe, efficient manner, that's how we start to transform. That's what we've always done.
Democrats call it investing, and I guess Republicans call it spending.
Well, I could call it either, because I think some of that is an investment. But, I mean, talk about fear-mongering, because this is what I hear all the time from your campaign. Well, Jeff just wants to make us Mississippi. Well, no, I don't. I'd move to Mississippi if I wanted to live in Mississippi. We'll never be anything like Mississippi, thank God. But you cannot promise everything to everyone. You've made $18.5 billion in promises, and I know we're missing some. Somebody's got to pay for that. And it's not some faceless rich guy who's going to pay for it. It's the single mom who's trying to afford childcare so she can work, which is what we all want for her. It's the senior on a fixed income who's getting taxed out of their home.
Can I give an interesting example about not having vision? We've had a crisis and horrific attacks in our corrections system, and we need more corrections officers. Jeff and I agree on that. And when asked about this, Jeff always says, where will you cut? He goes to HHS and education. People are in Stillwater, and we need more corrections officers because we know by kindergarten vocabulary with pretty good certainty that school or home to prison pipeline. And so to try and be thrifty on this, to take it away from that, to add more prison guards will actually exacerbate the problem on the front end. Instead of attacking it with the research that we know, viewing children as not coming in pieces, but viewing them holistically. And when we do this, we see results. So this idea that you're spending and it just costs, my favorite is, well, if you spend on roads, you know, it's X amount of dollars. If we don't spend a penny this year on roads in this country, it costs us hundreds of millions of dollars in idling tax repairs that get passed on to people.
Well, I've never once said that I would cut K-12 education, ever. Never. And it hasn't happened in Minnesota. It is actually, when people ask me what are your spending priorities, that is on the top along with transportation and a safety net. But again, this is the difference. Because I think you have to look at both sides of this bucket. You have to look at the investment or the spending and who it's helping. You also have to sometimes look at the people paying the bill. And you never look at that side of the equation. I know it's easy to spend other people's money. Well, I know it's very easy in government, especially in Congress. We have to actually care about the people who are paying,
Let me do a for instance here. Social Security tax cut for Minnesotans. I think the 2017 legislature did give some relief to lower and middle income Social Security recipients. But I checked with the legislative independent nonpartisan staff, and they said that by 2027, if you phased out the tax on Social Security, it would be a $1.2 billion biennial hit to the state coffers, and that it likely would help upper income seniors more than everybody else. Are you for that phase out of the Social Security tax?
Absolutely, over time, because in large part these are still people on fixed incomes. I would start with the income tax. Again, we are the highest tax state in America. Tim wants to raise taxes. He'll probably have to raise them a lot if he actually intends to keep his promises. I think we should provide some relief, first on the income tax, starting on the lowest level. Our lowest tier is higher than the highest tier in 23 other states. I think that's insane. Those are school teachers and electricians and bartenders, not CEOs of corporations. So that would be the starting point for me, at least. And when I talk about how do you provide relief, let's start by holding government accountable. Actually expecting some competence and rooting out fraud.
But that's just pennies on the dollar to what you would need.
It is not. Do you believe the legislative auditor? Because they have a pretty good reputation in St. Paul as a nonpartisan group. They they found in their report a year ago that we are giving out $500 million a year.
Out of a $45 billion biennial budget.
And you just talked about $600 million a year as a big deal.
Okay.
$500 million a year to people who aren't eligible. $100 million last year in child care fraud. We spent $100 million on MNLARS. The same people are asking for more money to try to fix the problem they created. We spend $40 million on MNsure, which still doesn't work, and we could move people to the federal exchange, and it would actually serve them better. That would save us $40 million more.
Yeah,
let's start there.
On this issue
he is talking real money here.
Social Security. Of course there is, and that's what we work at. I have a reputation in Congress that we find those. We find savings, we get them out. That's, again, saying this, and, well, you're going to... No, what I've said is that I'm a coalition builder. I'll actually work with legislators. I'll actually build people together, and we'll write budgets together to get to those outcomes with the idea what's the return on our investment. On this issue of Social Security, yes. Yeah, I agree with this, and I think looking at those top earners, but I happen to think that that's probably the right way to go to phase that out in Minnesota. And the one thing, again, that money is going to be spent back in our communities. It's going to be spent all across the state. It's going to be spent in greater Minnesota. So you do have economic growth that comes out of this. So just on one side of the ledger that you lost the revenue from the Social Security cut, you're going to gain it in terms of growth that's out there and people spending money in their community.
But wait, I mean, this is simple math. So you say you maybe will cut that tax, but you're talking about literally tens of billions of dollars in spending promises that you've made. Whose taxes are you going to raise to pay for that?
Jeff, what we've talked about, and I want to say this again, when we invest and are smart, the services that we save by...
Somebody's got to pay for it.
Can I finish?
Sorry.
Thank you. When you invest early, and we get these kids early, or we get people before they have chronic diseases, we end up saving tens of millions of dollars, or whatever the number you're coming up with. The idea is we've seen it that the research is there. The amount of money that we spend by not addressing issues, whether it's a child being homeless, whether it's a child with a toothache, whether it's a child that is hungry, some of the things that we're talking about of targeting and getting that right, you end up with the economic growth that spurs the economy. So this idea that there's a false scarcity at hand here, keep in mind that we've seen what's happened here. Corporations are making a lot of money off these latest tax cuts, and what we've seen is middle-class folks are barely keeping pace with inflation. We're talking about investing on the front end on many of these things to grow the economy.
But Tim, nobody's talking about cutting these programs that you're talking about that are important.
You have said it many times, Jeff, at debates. Did you not say you'd cut HHS?
No, I said we will start measuring programs to see which ones actually work. Because unlike you, I believe there's some fat in our government.
You don't think work, though?
Yeah, well, of course you cut them because they don't work. That's the whole point, and we don't measure anything. But you can't.
We should measure.
Tim, you can't make all these promises and then pretend like you can't. You're not going to raise taxes.
You can set a vision, Jeff, and that's what you can set a vision, and it entices people. That's what so many people are excited about this. The idea of what Minnesotans can do together, and the idea of when we work together. That's why you have all these mayors and county commissioners. This is something you haven't seen before, where they're part of this process. They're part of being included.
Speaking of paying for
things you can't do.
I'm curious about this because you say that you like new ideas. And you brought this up before about nursing home workers, that they don't make much money, which is true, they don't.
Yes.
Maine, the state of Maine, is looking at a ballot question this election cycle that it's a tax hike to fund universal home care, free home care for folks who are elderly to keep them in their homes. And I'm curious, I mean, with 10,000 baby boomers every day turning 65, this is a big problem in the state of Minnesota. And folks want to stay in their home. Nursing home care is pretty expensive. What is your plan to deal with the care crush?
Well, I mean, absolutely the first thing we have to do is make sure that we are paying people an adequate wage in this position, and that is a reimbursement rate from the state. They can't find workers, and in many cases they can't find qualified workers because you could go do something else. Literally, you could go to McDonald's and make more money, and this isn't just, it's not just in-home care for seniors, it is also group home care for some of our most vulnerable citizens. And the problem is we don't focus our spending on our most vulnerable citizens first. We spread it out so far, and we're going to do it even more so with Tim, that we can't focus on our most vulnerable citizens. That's what we need to do. A little focus in government will be amazing.
Until Jeff left on a tangent, I'm in agreement with him on this, that we need to do better. And it happens both with our seniors and it happens with our children that we pay the least amount to in the reimbursement rates on child care. Making sure, and again, I think you brought up a really important point, Kathy, when you said these folks want to stay in their homes. There's a savings that far outpaces long-term care facilities. There's a capacity in terms of quality of life and longevity of life that happens in-home. So what I've been saying through this whole time is for us, and Jeff and I agree on this, measuring outcomes, measuring efficiencies, measuring what the return on the dollar is. And so I think probably what they're looking at in Maine is they're looking at, are we spending this money on the back end anyway? Is there a more efficient way to spend it here and make a difference? And when those two things measure out, you may be saving money. And my guess is you probably would in this case.
But, Tim, you just criticized me for saying we should measure programs and eliminate those that don't work.
No, I didn't say that. I said
you did too. You said I would actually cut HHS. And
no, I just said you said it at a debate is all I said. You said they asked you where you...
And now you're saying you'll do the same thing.
I have a potential revenue source for you.
Let's hear it.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court has said that states can legalize sports gambling. And there's going to be a bill that I think is going to, on your cell phone, you'll be able to say, you'll bet whether Adam Thielen's going to get the next pass or catch the next pass or not.
Detroit likes Boyd, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Your hometown. This does bring a kind of a liberal conservative coalition against expansion of gambling, but it would be some tax revenue, I suppose.
I have always been opposed to expansion of gambling because I think the societal costs tend to outweigh the liberty benefit of it. But I've also said I'm open to this one. I think it's going to be a pretty tough coalition to pull together because the tribes are obviously going to have a great interest in this. And I've talked to the potential author of this bill, and he says he's going to work with them and we'll bring something forward if he can create that coalition. I'd be very open to that.
So you're open to it?
Yeah, I fall on the side of personal liberties. I worry if government's going to tell you who you can marry, what you can consume, or what you can do. But I don't disagree with Jeff that you have to be smart about the societal costs of it. You have to understand that there's going to be education piece of this. There's going to have to be making sure that you're controlling it the right way. But I think you have to go in with the personal liberties.
Can I just add that this is kind of personal for me because about 3 weeks ago, my senior in high school son came home to talk about the big report he had to write, and it was on sports betting. So we did some research, and then we called up Representative Garofalo, who's going to carry the bill, and asked him some questions about it. So we got it straight from the horse's mouth.
Let's do a quick lightning round because we were a little far afield the last one. So, what was your first car?
A 73 Chevy Camaro LT.
Muscle car.
Wow.
327.
Wow.
That's a powerful car.
That is so funny. Mine was a 78 Camaro.
Look at this.
I'm just a little bit younger, apparently.
This isn't as fun. Independent Commission on Redistricting.
Probably not. I think that the people who are voted in and have some responsibility to the citizens should probably do it.
I'm for the independent commission. Citizen or judicial, because the gerrymandering piece, and I can assure you of this, should I be given the privilege of being governor, we will not gerrymander districts in favor of Democrats nor Republicans. I think being in Congress, if the thing that I've learned is
the most
dysfunctional thing is gerrymandering. Okay. So yes, I agree with it.
Okay, plan to live in the governor's mansion?
Pardon me?
If you were to win the election, do you plan to live in the governor's mansion?
Have not given it any thought.
Okay.
I think it's not the thing to do now.
All right.
No.
You would not?
No, we have a son in high school, so we'll stay near the school.
I keep messing up this lightning round, okay?
Sorry.
Eric.
Next generation technology. You've talked quite a bit about government failing in quite a few places, and I think you make a pretty good case that there have been some shortcomings. But you're a couple of middle-aged guys, not really maybe hip to all the new digital stuff.
You might be surprised.
Well, maybe I would be. But what about that? Is it going to be a problem spending money on the technology to improve service delivery? Is it going to be a problem with an aging public employee workforce that isn't hip to this stuff? How do you see next generation technology getting involved in government services?
I think think it's huge, and we've actually been doing some of that in Hennepin County, and there's I'm heavily involved in public safety. There's Next Generation 911 that we've been looking at, and I mean, this is going to totally revolutionize government. And what it will do is it will serve people better, and eventually it will save us money. So we'll be moving forward with lots of new ideas there.
Will public employees be resistant to this kind of reforms?
No, I don't believe so, but you need to make sure that you have the training necessary. And I agree with Jeff on this, is where that is. I caution us, because you're right, it's unacceptable when we move from legacy computer systems to upgrade like MinLARs, and I caution that this is a challenge in the private sector, and it's a challenge in government. We did something when we were going to DOD and VA are going to come together on one electronic health record, and we put together, it hadn't been done in a long time, we put an extra subcommittee in the VA that is totally responsible for the oversight of that, hiring people from Google and the companies to come in as staffers that will oversee that. But Jeff is right. It has the potential to save, to be efficiencies, but it also has the potential to go awry, and the cost overruns in the private sector and government are huge if you're not careful.
So my introduction, I said we're going to try to keep you guys on your toes. I want you guys to ask each other a question. Would you like to ask Congressman Walz a question right now?
Sure. I'll ask the same question I just asked. You've made tons of promises for spending. What taxes are you going to raise to pay for them?
Yeah, the gas tax, I think, has to be to address the issues. We're C- in roads and have,
what else?
Have to be there.
Because that'll cover a piece of the roads.
No, and then I said when we look at the budget, we start looking at where there are things that aren't efficient. I certainly wouldn't have given a tax cut to premium cigar manufacturers.
I'm talking about your spending increase promises, $18 billion. Yes. How do you pay for them? Who pays
First of all,
them?
Jeff, you don't get to make up numbers in your basement and bring it into here. So no one is saying that.
Part of it came from the Star Tribune. That was the starting point.
No one is saying that. But going back to this idea of bringing folks in who care, the mayors care, the state legislators care, the hospitals care, and bringing them in as we write this. But this is something that I said I did promise that we would do. We would write a budget in a transparent manner and not unveil it. And so my question to you is that I think certainly I take a look at the gas tax.
But I didn't get an answer to mine yet. Can I follow up?
Go ahead.
No, you did.
So
I haven't seen the budget
yet. You're going to bring stakeholders together, and you're going to make a decision.
Correct. Together.
But the problem is you've promised free college, you've promised free pre-K, you've promised free health care for everybody. You've said we're going to have $15.
We've not promised free health care for everybody. We promised the Minnesota Care buy-in at cost.
Single payer. No, you've promised single payer. Well, you just said earlier that was where you want to go.
I'll talk slowly on this one. The path that most people get to is a single payer path. The way that we start in Minnesota of reducing costs is allowing folks in that 5% in the individual market to be able to buy in at their cost into Minnesota Care. So that's a start, and that's an even. That's a flush on that. And that's why.
Not a flush, but
well, that's why when you critique me, and that's why when you critique me, the Minnesota Hospital Association had to put out a letter and contact all the press to say it was untrue, that was the case.
Would you like to ask him a question, by the way?
Well, I still don't have an answer, but that's okay.
Well, go ahead.
Sure. What is your single biggest accomplishment working in government with people?
I would say we completely rewrote the property rights law in 2004. We rewrote eminent domain law. I did it with a Democrat named Tom Bach as my chief author in the Senate. I was the chief author in the House. I can give you a couple others.
No, just that one. And what were the implications of it?
The implications was it protected people from government taking their property because government thought some other private entity could better use it.
Yeah. How about penny a pill to fund opioid research and prevention and all that stuff?
No, absolutely not. I don't think increasing a tax on something that's already overpriced, prescription drugs, for people who are misusing it and for people who are using it correctly, makes any sense at all. We have a $24 billion annual budget. The opioid crisis is a huge problem. One of the other successes I could talk about with
we have tobacco taxes, though, too. We have tobacco taxes.
Yeah, and we could keep creating new ones, but it increases the price. One of the points of the tobacco tax was to increase the price. Do we really want to increase the price of prescription drugs? No. So we have a $24 billion budget. If it's a priority, and I think it is, we can fund it there.
Yes, 4,417 drugs increased last year. 40 went down. Record profits at these companies. We need to work together. I did a step pain management bill in Congress that started to work on this, where they partnered with us in the VA. This just makes sense. As governor, I'll bring them in. Instead of bringing 26 lobbyists to the Capitol to fight against the penny a pill, that would all go to prevention, treatment. Of course, again, every bit of that would save so much money. Well, they'll increase them anyway. That's my point, that 4,400, they're going to do so anyway.
Increase them more.
The issue is, of course, the pass-through, but this one is, I would rather us capture it on the long run. You know how much we're spending We're spending a lot more than $20 million on the opioid crisis, not to mention the human destruction that's going through communities, especially in our indigenous communities. This is costing us hundreds of millions of dollars to address it. And most of the folks who authored this in a bipartisan manner said we could get real results.
Can I just add that when you asked about accomplishments, another that I would have brought up was the anti-meth bill of, I don't remember what year it was, 2005. I think I was the chief author in the House. I had worked with Senator Rosen in the Senate, and it was the most comprehensive anti-meth bill ever passed in the country. It became a model around the country. It worked. We now have the problem again, unfortunately, because it's coming in a different way. But here's a great example of that. If we can do this in a comprehensive way, we can solve the opioid crisis, but I don't think increasing a tax on consumers makes sense.
We have another question from a viewer. This is Beth Ann Bloom, and this comes kind of interesting. 20 years ago, Jesse Ventura was elected governor, and he demonstrated pretty good judgment in terms of how he picked his cabinet. You know, and she wants to know, how would you choose your commissioners, and who will you ask for advice? And you know, in terms of Ventura, his cabinet was not beholden to him. I mean, he was kind of straight down the middle there. There was no political appointees.
Well, I will have a group of people that have some broad experience, particularly in the business world, to start vetting people, because I'm guessing we're going to have thousands and thousands of applications. Both of us will. And we are actually starting to put that in place. In the event that I win, it'll be pretty much ready to go. And what I'm going to look for in commissioners are, number one, people who actually have on-the-ground experience in the area they're regulating. So not necessarily the chair of the House committee, but somebody who to run ag that's actually farmed. And then I'm going to look for people who are unafraid, who are fearless to change the culture in our state agencies, because we have a culture that has gotten out of hand in some of our state agencies, a culture of controlling and directing as opposed to serving. And it's going to be hard work to change that culture. You need the right people.
The people most impacted by the decisions we make need to be at the table. That's been a theme of One Minnesota from the beginning, and it's putting those folks there to talk about the attributes. And for me, it's about servant leadership. It's about flat organizational structures that people are there to serve, and that you empower people to innovate. You empower people to do what the mission is, to serve the folks, their constituents, to serve the people of Minnesota, but to do so using innovative methods and making sure that the voices are heard on the front end. That's where we run into too much problems of setting the parameters.
So how would you choose commissioners? I'm sorry, I'm a little confused.
Putting a group together of the stakeholders who would be impacted.
I see.
And then making sure that those folks' voice are heard as we structure what we're looking for. And for me, it's going to be someone who has the capacity, it's the servant leadership model, but has a capacity to make independent decisions, to start and empower people to innovate and make those agencies responsible.
Could a Democrat be in your cabinet?
Sure.
Could a Republican be in your cabinet?
Absolutely.
You guys are very civil. You disagree, but it's pretty civil. Are you the exception to the rule in modern politics, or what's going on with the lack of civility? You guys have been good over the campaign, but
yeah, it's gotten ugly. It's really gotten ugly, and it's gotten ugly in our race. It hasn't between the two of us personally.
The outside spending
I appreciate,
has been tough.
And it's been vile, quite frankly, especially lately with the disabled commercial. But and that's too bad that Minnesota has had a history where we haven't gone there. I hope we're not going there.
Is there some antidote to it?
Well, I think it takes this, and the outside spending is a piece of that. And I'm sure I don't look at TV, but I'm sure I'm getting pummeled with my share of things on that too. But I do think it was important that at least the ads coming out of the campaigns would attempt to tell us where we were at. And then I think the 8 appearances together to try and do our best to disagree. Yep. But I did not see the ad. I did not see the ad.
All right. Thank you both for a good couple of years of campaigning, and all the best to you down the final weekend. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Well, thank you to the candidates, obviously. We wish you both well. And we want to remind you that there are only 2 other candidates on the ballot for governor. We had a debate a few weeks back with minor party candidates Josh Welter and Chris Wright. You can find that segment on tpt.org/almanac. Thank you so much for watching. Tune in again next week when we meet up with some of Tuesday's winners.